Welcome back. This is part two of our unit on advertising and public relations. In the first part, we looked at the different types of inside the promotion mix, ranging from advertising, personal selling, to direct marketing. Um, in this one, we're going to look more at some of the particular decisions made by advertisers. In particular, we're going to look at how we choose to frame the message. We're going to look about how we choose the vehicle or the method of distributing the message. And finally, we're going to look closer at one element of the promotion mix, public relations, which some people don't consider strictly as advertising, but certainly is involved in building customer relationships and adding value to those customer relationships. So let's begin by looking at our roadmap. The first thing we're going to look at is some of the key advertising decisions. So some of these I mentioned before in my introduction. These are how to frame your message. They're in what vehicle to distribute the message. So if you're trying to increase your reach or the impact of the message, where to place the message and what would be the best thing for that. The second thing we're going to look at is how we evaluate our advertising strategies. How do we know that they're achieving their intended objective that we talked about in the first video lecture? And lastly, we're going to look at how good public relations can foster relationships with customers that create value that can later be captured by your business. So let's look at some of the major advertising decisions. Probably the most important one, and the one that probably gets the most attention and seems the most close, for example, when you see TV presentations of like an advertising company, there seems to be a lot about developing a message or a slogan or a jingle. However, this is usually incorporated in a larger message strategy, which means after choosing your advertising objective and after choosing how you're going to determine what your advertising budget is, you need to have kind of a clear message about what are the customer benefits that they're going to get from these advertising appeals. Why are they going to see value in that? And particularly to be consistent in your message. And usually when you understand what your message is, it's a lot easier to write the actual copy that's going to go with your advertisement. So you want to have, let's say, the big idea, which is, we are everyday low prices, we are providing quality, we are providing a unique experience, we're solving a particular problem for the customer. And for an ad, for the appeal, and just three things that need to be important in every advertising appeal are that it has to be meaningful, believable, and distinctive. So let's review what that means to be meaningful, believable, and distinctive. Let's start with distinctive first and then move back to the top. Distinctive means that you can have a really good advertisement, but it cannot look like one of your competitors or another product because people are not going to be able to distinguish that from other advertisements. So people see a lot of commercials every day. They see them on television, they see them on the internet, they see them on billboards. If you're choosing, let's say, the same color scheme, there might be in the blur of, let's say, non-focus attention, you're not going to stand out from a variety of all different commercials. What you generally want and what the best commercials are ones that make a clear impact. And you see this in some Super Bowl advertisements that people can remember them 10, 15, 20 years later because they had that much of an impact and they stood out from, let's say, the hundreds and hundreds of Super Bowl commercials that are made every single year. The second thing is that it has to be believable, which means if you promise things that are incredible, and the word incredible meaning not believable, you're not going to have the impact because people are just going to say, well, these are just words, these are not real promises, and they're not going to lead to action on behalf of by your customers. And lastly, they have to be meaningful, which means they have to have some connection to your message, they have to have some connection to your product, they have to be able to give useful information that will help a customer act upon, let's say, decision to buy a certain product and also to choose, direct them toward your products versus your competitors. And by meaningful, it has to be, let's say, not frivolous. There are a lot of things that are, particularly when we talked about the merging of advertising and entertainment, there's a danger that people make really entertaining but not meaningful, that they're kind of puff pieces, and you want something to, so the point is that you need to be strong in that area as well. So meaningful, believable, and distinctive. So some of the execution styles of various advertisements, and it's not a comprehensive or complete list, but these are some of the types of things that kind of frame different advertising messages. So let's start on the right-hand side here, where you might want to, in a sense, provide data or provide scientific evidence, particularly when you're making a persuasive argument or you're making a comparative ad where you're comparing your, let's say, product with another product. You want to have, let's say, testimonial evidence or endorsements by people who are going to have their authority or have, let's say, credibility of their own credibility or authority transferred to your product. You can provide scientific evidence and studies showing that your product might be better than other products. And this is particularly true when you're doing things like pharmaceuticals, healthcare, things like toothpaste. People want to, let's say, really know about, is there a proven, let's say, effect to the product. The more technical the product, the more important the technical expertise is. So that you might want to have things about the relative levels of performance, or a study, or an independent rating agency that's going to, let's say, evaluate different products. So you often see this with automobiles, where they have Motor Trend's Car of the Year, and the idea that Motor Trend is independent, and let's say their judgment is they're not, in a sense, they're not paying for that judgment from Motor Trend, but what they're saying is that because Motor Trend is independent, when they make a judgment and compare two different vehicles, that's an independent, objective analysis that you should take into consideration in purchasing your own automobile. And then there's, you might call style, which is the, you've seen this a lot with advertisements during the pandemic, where people haven't been able to shoot new commercials because they, because of the limitations and social distancing restrictions. So people are using a lot of pre-shot video, but they're kind of, in a sense, framing it by using mood music. So you have this kind of like background piano music that sounds supportive and comforting, and not really talking about their product so much, but more of a message of like, we're here to support you. We realize that, this is a hard time, so don't worry about our product so much, but let us know what we can do to support you, and maybe perhaps this is something that we are doing during this time of crisis. But you can, more ordinary advertisements, you might do kind of a slice of life where the camera goes into a household and shows, let's say, a homemaker using one of their products, or someone using, let's say, some type of farm and garden tool out in the yard. So they're capturing, let's say, an ordinary thing, a family having dinner. Those would be kind of slice of life. They can be fantasy. So, for example, if you're driving an automobile and it's tinted and you're driving at high speeds on city streets, and usually you see kind of a chyron below the advertisement saying, professional driver on a closed course. But the idea of, let's say, the feeling of driving an expensive car fast in an idyllic environment, music has been very important. So music can either be soothing, it can be provocative, it can be exciting. And so that can be an element. And these are all kind of things that advertising agencies focus on in the design of their message. But I think most of us understand it. I think the key thing here is you have made a choice about your advertising objective. You've made a decision about what is the purpose of your advertisement, what are you trying to achieve. And therefore, once you have that big idea, the organizing concept of how you're going to present yourself, then these kind of execution styles kind of flow from that. And the key thing here is that you want things that are going to be consistent. You don't want things that are being cross-messaging, even if though they're effective in isolation. So when you're the execution style, one of these things about it is a tone. So memorable, attention-getting words. There are people who study these things. Words that are easy to say, words that kind of are not grating, kind of soft-sounding words. You see this in terms of the tone of, let's say, a lot of the TV commercials during the pandemic. They're resilient, they're comforting, they're soft, they're not very decidedly not materialistic. They're mostly emphasizing how different companies and products can be of assistance in a time of need, or very often how people are supporting the effort to fight the pandemic. So I've seen advertisements for Verizon. I see this when I go to my public utility page. They're all kind of looking like confident, strong, organized, resilient, ready to take on the job. And then, there's the technical things about the formatting, which is like, if you're going to do, let's say, a paper copy, what types of illustrations and style of illustrations do you want to go with photos or drawn illustrations? So, for example, in Japan, one reason why illustrators can make so much money is that most Japanese prefer something that is drawn to a photo in their advertisements. While in the United States, you see a lot more focus on photographs and video as the basis for their advertisement. The headline obviously is the big message, and the copy are kind of, let's say, the text below that. And we've seen this in a lot of the specific examples of advertisements that I've shown you in the different video lectures. Now, another way to approach this is to kind of, instead of having kind of a top-down or orchestrated or designed, let's say, advertisement, is to kind of use your consumers and your customers to generate messages for you. So this can be by using commonly used memes. It can be used by using existing videos. I think one thing that you see a lot of people supporting is that people create YouTube videos demonstrating use of various products, and my understanding is that in many cases that people are hoping that they're going to get free merchandise from the company by using a demonstration of their product, how to put it together, how to do an installation, and you can find, and I think the thing about this is that when people are doing searches on a YouTube or Vimeo, what they're finding is that they're looking for like how-to or comparison ads, and there are a bunch of people with technical expertise, but seem like everyday type of people, not, let's say, paid sponsors or paid testimonials using their products. And I think a lot of people find that very useful because they see them as not contrived. And in a day and age where a lot of people resist advertisements because they feel they're being manipulated, they're more likely to take a testimonial that doesn't seem to be one to be paid for. And so very often you're seeing businesses using these customer-generated messages and very often holding contests. Saying, look, and you see this particularly on, e-commerce websites where some of the reviews are paid for. There's a contest, and whoever gives the best review of a product wins a prize. And I see sometimes a subtext saying, this was submitted for evaluation in a contest. I'm not sure if that's supposed to be like, so take it with a grain of salt, or flagging it that this was a review done for a particular purpose. Now, some of the benefits of using these messages is that customers generally have better ideas about what is the value of your brand than sometimes you do, and how it's used. For example, if you were advertising something like duct tape, it would be kind of more interesting all the different ways that people use duct tape that are hard to brainstorm in a small group of people who might have very similar experiences. So when everyone's an ad executive, they have a kind of a similar set of life experiences. They might live in limited spaces, and you might want to broaden beyond that, and you get new ideas by, in a sense, inviting other people into the process. But you also get the impact of getting customer involvement in your product, and that means that they're thinking about it, they're talking about it, and it has the advantage that it seems like it's word of mouth and not, let's say, an orchestrated, designed advertisement that sometimes people from repeated exposure have a resistance to. Now, the second one is kind of how you're going to advertise, which is what type of media you're going to use, how frequently you're going to run your advertisements, and what type of impact you're searching for. So we saw this when we were doing the virtual business with advertisement in social media and traditional media for our arena and for the sporting and the concerts. We had things like what percentage and different reach different media had, how frequently we want to run the ad, and obviously there was a cost associated with this, so you didn't just want to do more, always have a maximum reach or have the highest frequency possible. We had to choose that within, let's say, what we were doing with all the other things in the virtual business simulation. So there are different major media types. We have internet, we have television, radio, print media. As we've said in the past, some of these are more attractive to different people, different age groups. Older people tend to be more reliant on print media, younger people more on media like social media, internet, e-commerce, etc. People who are, let's say, Generation X and maybe boomers are much more comfortable with television advertisements. There's also a thing where different types of lifestyles and different types of products kind of are connected to people who are more likely to look in certain types of media than others. And particularly if you're trying to target a particular market segment, you might favor one media over another if certain media seems dominant in that area. And even within this, that it's not just the type of media, but it is maybe the particular vehicle. So for example, certain magazines target different demographics and different types of lifestyles. field and country, if you're doing something like hunting, fishing, things of that sort. Auto trend might be one if you're doing something more with automobiles. And if you can find your different audiences because magazines and television programs and media also have this kind of targeting going on. Um, and then lastly, there's a choice of timing that you don't necessarily, you might want to run the ad more at one time of the year. You might want to decide on the frequency. Sometimes with a lot of advertisements, and particularly in politics, you don't run the advertisement a lot. What you're trying to do is put the advertisement out there and then what's called get free media by getting the press or the news to talk about it and getting your frequency by the repetition in that echo chamber rather than in a sense by running it as a commercial all the time. So some of these, and just to know these terms, reach, frequency, and media impact. Reach is a percentage of people exposed to the ad campaign in a given period. So what percentage of the people that you want or what percentage of the total public is being reached by this. Not everyone is on the internet. Not everyone is on television. I find that when I was younger, I watched a lot more television. Now I'm more likely to see things on a computer. Other people are very much linked to their phones. And therefore, the reach is not something that's hardwired. It changes by technology and what media channel people are using. You can choose on the number of times it's exposed to the advertisement, and so this often leads to how people are paid. You can pay by the amount of time, the length of the advertisement, how many times it runs, what time of day it runs, or if you're doing online, very often what you're doing is the number of clicks on the advertisement is what creates the how you're paid for it. So the point is, on an online advertisement, it's always there, but it's only activated when you click on it, and therefore you might look for, let's say, something like 10,000 or 15,000 clicks. That's kind of the measure of, let's say, how much you want to pay for. And then lastly, media impact is mostly the qualitative value, which means you're not measuring in terms of number of clicks, you're not doing it in terms of percentages. You are seeing that what kind of ooh or the O impact people are going to have when they see it in a different medium. Some mediums have a bigger impact than others. For example, television advertisements during the Super Bowl, advertisements during live broadcasts of entertainment events and things of that sort. Sometimes it's the contrast between the actual product and where it's being found for a certain type of thing. So you might be working on the contrast on that. And by qualitative value means it's not something you can measure by just counting the number of times people are seeing it. As I said with the political ads, a lot of them, one of the most effective political ads is what's called the Daisy ad that was run in 1964 in the Lyndon Baines Johnson Goldwater race, and it had a small girl picking the petals off a daisy that led to the countdown for like a missile launch and kind of ending with kind of a mushroom cloud. It was only played one time, but the reason why it's so well known is that it had such a huge impact that people kept talking about it. There was word of mouth. The news media evaluated, seeing whether it was a fair ad or not. Basically, you are driving the message and driving the conversation. And even in the sense that you don't necessarily want people to have a positive reaction, even with people having a negative reaction, the idea that people deliberately troll people might be part of like the media impact as well. So as we saw in the virtual business simulation, medias have different advantages and disadvantages. Some of it is just by who is linked into in different types of media. There is a cost of different media. Some of them are much more costly than others, and I think we learned that in the virtual business simulation where they had different price levels. So obviously some were more effective, but usually they were able to charge more. If you are, I think in this image you're showing kind of a very simple one, using something that like a line on a pedestrian crosswalk for Mr. Clean is something that doesn't cost as much because it doesn't have premier placing at eye level. But the point is that it's something that people are going to walk across every day, and because it contrasts and stands out, it might be a relatively effective and cost-effective way of getting a message out. Mostly because people already have an association with Mr. Clean, and let's say the bald-headed guy, Mr. Clean, is kind of become iconic. because the use of media changes by your customers and the public, the media mix that you're doing should be, evaluated, examined, and perhaps reconfigured depending on how people are changing. As I said before, television would have been the best way to approach me as a consumer in the past. Um, like many people in the years, as a cable cutter, someone who doesn't really have, broadcast TV or watches commercials, that would not be the best way to get to me as a consumer, even though it would have been a great way 5 or 10 years ago. Okay, so as I was saying before, it's not, just a type of media. So it's not just print, TV, or internet. It is usually certain websites for online. It can be certain magazines or newspapers for print. It can be certain programs. So what you see advertised on, let's say, ESPN, a sports dedicated channel, can be very different than something you can find on um, something like Lifetime or things of that sort. People want to be associated with particular shows. So if you're, you want probably if you're doing something with food or kitchen implements, you're going to do that on the Food Network and things of that sort. And these are, things that we've kind of talked about, and some of them are pretty much intuitive. That when you're considering your advertising, you're not looking for the best advertisement. You're looking for the best advertisement for the dollar that you're spending on it. And you might want to decide what the quality and engagement is. So, for example, late night advertisements and these kind of uh, paid TV commercials, they are 20, 30 minutes long. Late at night, you're not maybe getting a certain audience because even though it's cheap to advertise, let's say after midnight, you're not getting as many eyes watching it. The audience quality is that the types of people, for example, like if you are advertising most of the people who are unable because of income or wealth to buy your product, that's not really an effective advertisement. Um, but there are sometimes where you can go counter to the expectation. There are some people who are night workers, and there are some people who are up late at night, and you might be able to try to target them in particular. Uh, sort of, for example, like EMS workers, security guards, police, are people who are going to be up maybe perhaps later at night, and sometimes that is why you might show certain programs at certain times of day. Um, for radio commercials, ones that go during the morning and evening commute are worth a lot more than ones in the middle of the day. Sometimes people have radios on just in the background during the middle of the day, but you're not getting dedicated when people are in their cars. And at least before people had, phones, they could stream content and podcasts and things of that sort. You were kind of trapped in your car during the commute, listening to the radio because you're listening for traffic updates, or you're listening for the financial news at the beginning of the morning. You might be able to get better advertisements during those times. The other one is the timing, which is not necessarily, the frequency that you're going to be showing your advertisement, but when you want to do that. So a lot of things are seasonal. So you don't want to be advertising, like say, outdoor power tools in the winter. You want to do that kind of in the spring when everything's turning green and people are in their yards and thinking about work. You might have more, let's say, seasonal ads, particularly around the holiday seasons in the winter, because people, the gift giving and things of that sort. You might see this particularly with fashion and clothing, kind of tying it into different fashion seasons. And then there's kind of the pattern, which is, do you want to have like a consistent pattern, which means people see your advertisement 4 times a week, every single week for a year, or do you want to have what's called a pulse, which means you have much more frequent at certain times and then a drop off, and then when you think people's attention is flagging, you have another pulse up. And so the point is that you kind of you reinforce something at staged intervals. So just as an example of a seasonal ad. So obviously this is tied to the Christmas season with a little baby, and people like to take pictures around the holiday season because their families are together, Thanksgiving, Christmas cards, things of that sort. And so you might see more advertisements of a certain kind. You see this with back to school ads in the mid and late summer. Um, and a lot of it's because a lot of retail is tied to kind of different buying seasons. There's Valentine's Day, there's Easter, St. Patrick's Day, kind of in between there, Memorial Day, Labor Day, and they all have very distinctive, let's say, products that are being pushed at certain times of the year. So our next thing is about how do we evaluate our advertising and the return on our advertising investment. And what this means is that for every dollar spent, what are we getting? So if you can look at in terms of revenues for every dollar spent, you can look at this in terms of sales for every dollar spent. You can look at it at certain activities. So for example, if you're not looking strictly at sales as a way of evaluating your advertising investment, you can look at it in terms of, let's say, how many people showed interest or favorited your product, or were able to repeat a certain message that you're trying to get out there, changing kind of the framing of your product and things of that sort. Um, you can do this qualitatively or quantitatively. So there's quantitative things like you can just say, look, we can look at revenue prior to the advertising campaign and revenue after the advertising campaign. And so you can see, you can tie it to the increase in revenues. You can do it by number of clicks. You can do it by like Google searches, like how many people are looking for certain words or looking for your product online. There are different ways to do that, and this depends upon your advertising objective, but also the cost of getting the information to evaluate your advertising. So you see this, there's a lot of companies that basically are in the business of advertising because they watch what people are watching. They do surveys about commercials. So Super Bowl ads particularly have large audiences, and as a result, people know how many people are watching for like every single commercial, and they kind of maybe price the commercials and the second spots for commercials by how many people they think that will be watching at a time. So some people, the halftime show might draw more certain types of people than others. Might be people like critical breaks, planned breaks like 2-minute warnings during a football game, things of that sort, versus untimed breaks, things that people don't know that are happening, like replay reviews and things of that sort. So another part to this is like, how do you organize advertising? And a lot of this is whether you're going to be doing the advertising in-house or whether you're going to hire, let's say, a contractor to handle your advertising. So in a small company, you might have one person, or it might be one person who's also doing other types of jobs. It might be a salesperson who's in charge of, let's say, getting the message out there, creating the ads. In a larger company, you might have an ad department, which is a division of the larger company. So if you're something like Macy's or JCPenney or Sears or Walmart, you might have someone who's devoted to kind of working on the ads for your business, because you do so much advertising. It's cheaper to do it in-house than outside. And then you have various advertising agencies, and what you see with advertising agencies, some of them are considered high-end and general purpose for a variety of different businesses. But you also see some advertising agents that specialize in certain kinds of ad. So you have some people who specify in things that are kind of like avant-garde or countercultural. You have people that focus on high-quality advertisements, so more like mainstream companies. You have ones that focus on maybe different demographics, so youth, middle-aged, elderly, etc. And usually they have some type of specialty, or rather than try to do everything for everyone, they kind of specialize in one area. And therefore, when a company knows that they have to improve their performance with a particular demographic or market, or wants a particular kind of feel to their ad, they might go to a particular advertising agency. One of the other things about having outsiders, advertising agencies, is sometimes that they might have a better view of why your advertising strategy is not working, because they're not inside the echo chamber where you're getting the same people who have a kind of a defined view of your product and your company, and don't really go outside the lines on that. They might also bring in a wider range of experience, even when they're specialized in a particular demographic or type of product. Um, International advertising raises some interesting things. One, because there are limits and there are restrictions on how you can do advertisements in different countries. but also that what works in different cultures. Um, so in the one I'm most familiar with is, as I'm sure you know, is Japan. And what you see in Japan is that you're much more likely to see American celebrities than Japanese celebrities on TV advertisements in Japan. But in many ways, what happens is that they're very much campy and farcical, which means that while a lot of American celebrities who do American advertisements tend to be uh, uh, I would say lower tone, quiet, conversational. I can clearly remember Bruce Willis doing an ad for a gasoline company with him wielding two gas spigots, kind of like flamethrowers. And it was so over the top. And what's happened with, and there's a movie called um, uh, Lost in Translation. In Lost in Translation, it basically the premise of the movie is that Bill Murray is an American, a washed-up American celebrity, and he's doing a Suntory whiskey commercial in Japan because he's popular in Japan in a way that he wouldn't be in the United States. And then the movie goes from, let's say, his personal loneliness and finding people in a foreign environment. But that is actually very common. Um, and part of this is because the spread of American culture through Hollywood movies and American products um, have made American celebrities more familiar in many countries than domestic celebrities. Or at least kind of what we were talking before in the previous video lecture is that to hire an American celebrity is more expensive. And so when you use an American celebrity, it's kind of indicating that you're wealthy and you're an established company and product, and therefore you can avoid to go above the cheap local celebrity to do your advertising. So this brings us to our last topic, which is public relations. And I think the key thing about public relations is that it is not strictly about selling a particular product. It's not necessarily about um, some big idea and your company branding. A lot of it is about managing the news about your company. So it's about responding to negative reports, particularly about maybe how you treat your workers, how you affect the environment, and things of that sort. But also doing things that are kind of creating kind of a globe, good corporate citizen view of your company. So it can be sponsoring things like fundraisers for various medical causes. It could be golf tournaments. It could be linking your product with a sports team or things of that sort. And so mostly it's that there's kind of an ongoing, let's say, media rush, and you need some people with full-time attention managing, let's say, how your company is being viewed by the public, even when they're not, in a sense, dealing with your particular. Um, so some of the things that public relations or PR departments perform, it's writing the press releases, and particularly in an age where there's the media, like print media, television media, are cutting back on the reporters. What you're seeing increasingly is that uh, because they can't generate their own stories, newspapers and internet platforms and television platforms are just printing news releases from companies and maybe just reworking them a little bit to make them sound a little better. And I think particularly in local news, probably about at least a third, if not a half, of all the stories are just press releases from businesses making announcements about uh, things they want to get out into the press. And so they're using their greater resources to kind of control the messaging around their company. It could be about publicity about their product. So new product, they want to get the word out, exciting product, and kind of get a buzz going around it. It can be public affairs and lobbying, so anything that handles, let's say, government regulation or government actions relative to your product or your company. It can be investor relations if you're a publicly traded company because you want people to buy your stock. You want them to be happy with how the company is running. Um, and the key thing about this is that even though you usually a public relations team means hiring personnel, it is not as many personnel as, let's say, hiring a team of salespeople. And you can impact public awareness by just someone who understands getting your message into the flow of, let's say, coverage. And So I was talking before about political advertisements, and particularly the idea of breaking into a news cycle, having people who go on and make statements, and then getting free media by having the news repeat your message or discuss your message, even when your message is absurd or even when your message is offensive. The fact that people are talking about it generates, let's say, news or let's say awareness about that. And I think you've seen this very often where people try to go viral. You see this in terms of graduation speeches. You see this in terms of people trying to become influencers. And a lot of this has to do with just being constantly cultivating your image and putting things out there, and people who have no expertise taking positions or making statements on things that they have no direct relationship to just because, well, I should have a statement on this. Um, so uh, this is it's becoming important because the free media has become more important because of the cost of advertising, but also, as I've said many times during this and the previous video lecture, people have become more suspicious about things that look like advertisements because they feel like they're being manipulated. So they put their guard up. And if you do it and you connect it to something that seems to be about something else, and then getting the name of your company or your product built into it, um, it doesn't seem like an advertisement. So, for example, if you make a donation of your product um, to some charity, the charity will mention your product, but you don't feel like the charity is showing gratitude. They're not, in a sense, making an endorsement. They're not, let's say, trying to push a sale because the product was given away free. And so there are more and more clever ways where people are using public relations to improve their brand. So just one example of this is like Nintendo, uh, using like having like their Wii and having people play on it. One good example of this is that in Japan, there's a neighborhood in Tokyo called Akihabara, and in Akihabara, all the different Japanese console manufacturers have like an arcade in the streets, and people can just walk up and they will play games. And this is a way for them to kind of product test what games are drawing a buzz and whether people who are really serious are liking different things. And they use this to kind of glean information, but also kind of get their brand out there by the hardcore gamers who are maybe the ones who are going to, by word of mouth, spread the news about their products. So just some public relations tools. It can be speeches, it can be special events, it can be celebrity golf tournaments, it could be making contributions to charities. It could be small videos to kind of get the message out. It can be a higher political profile, so associating yourself with certain policies or serving on boards, blue ribbon panels for presidential panels or things of that sort. It can even just even social networking or the company website. Some companies put a lot more into their website, not because their website is an e-commerce location, but the website is kind of their window onto the world. So that's it for this unit. Our last unit will be the next one, and that'll be focusing on one aspect of the promotion mix, and that will be personal selling. Kind of the personal selling, the face-to-face selling. But that's for now, and I will see you next time.